Well, welcome everybody. This is our 20th episode of the series Ideas and Lives. And today we're very thrilled to have as our guest Tamar Frankel and my buddy Tzvi Bodie, who is the co-host of this program. I'm Bob Lerman, a social policy economist, and the co-host is Tzvi Bodie, and Tzvi is an old friend and colleague of Tamars, and I'll let Tzvi take over with an introduction and the first questions.
Okay, well, so let me say that Tamar Frankel is my role model of successful aging. I myself am 78. I'm not going to say how old Tamar is. She can say if she wants to, but one of the things that we're going to talk about is how does she do it? Because she's still going strong. We were colleagues together. We're both retired now from Boston University, but we were colleagues for many, many years. She at the law school and me at the business school. And we have had many conversations. We didn't always agree about everything, but you're going to hear her opinion about things today. So, Tamar, first question for you. You were born and raised in Israel. Tell us what it was like growing up there.
Well, yes, I was born and raised in Israel. When I was born, and that tells you my age, I will make it quite clear. I'm going to be 97 in July.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov is right.
And so Tel Aviv was a main city apart from Jerusalem and was quite small. But the point was everybody knew each other. It was a very close community. So we lived, when I was 3 years old, we lived on the Rothschild Boulevard and Allenby Street. And we lived on the second floor, and on the first floor was a bank. And of course, they knew me and I knew them, and we had long conversations about a lot of things. One day, the door was open, and I decided, I think, to take a little walk around. And I went downstairs, and I went to the other direction where my mother used to take me. And mother suddenly saw I was gone. And she then ran downstairs to the bank and said, Tamar is gone. So what does a bank do in such a case? In Israel, what it did is the bank closed and went to look for me. Obviously, that was the post. And I went to the opposite direction, but what I did was to meet the milkman, the one who would be milk. And he said, Tamar, where are you going? And I said, that direction. He said, come on. Took me by the hand and brought me. But that was a typical situation. The bank would close. I want to tell one more story, because that was something when I was much older. I was in the army, and myself and another, we were both officers, were on the Jordan River going up in a Jeep. But then the Jeep decided that it doesn't like the terrain and stopped. Well, we tried, we pushed here, there, it didn't work. And we had about 10, 15 miles to walk. And the bus went by. The bus stopped. 20 people went down, including the driver. What's wrong? Doesn't work. Wait a minute. He takes his tools and whatever. Everybody stands around and gives advice, of course. And he begins to work here, work there. And then, brrr, it worked. Everybody is very happy, says, drive carefully, and thank you. We thank them. It occurred to me afterwards, it was the same kind of thing. No one of these strangers, I didn't know any of them, said, what is this service? Is that a bus service? I have a meeting, my wife is waiting, whatever it was. It didn't occur to them. Our safety was their business. And I think throughout my life, and I think today too, the idea of saying this is your problem, not mine, doesn't occur, especially when there's danger. And there was a danger there. So the answer is, this is another example of much later, same culture.
It's like one family.
Like one family. And by the way, like one family, you're also critical, you're critical, you don't always agree, you're not always very nice, but it doesn't matter, there's a caring. This is.
I know. I remember when I lived in Israel and our baby was born, we took her for a walk.
Right.
And everybody, it was a sunny day. Everybody had an opinion. You should put a hat on her.
That's
You
right.
should- Amazing.
By the way, I got that too when my child was eating. Mike was 3 years old and there was a lot of ice cream all over him. Somebody stood there and said, you can't do that, he will catch a cold. There's nothing on him. I didn't know this guy, but it's exactly what you described.
That's
That's
funny.
the good and that's the not so good sometimes.
All right. Now tell us about your military career as a young woman in Israel.
Okay. I didn't start in Israel military. I started in the illegal Haganah when the British were ruling Israel. And we needed that badly. So let me describe one situation which gives you again a feel. Two things. Number one, I had about 100 young women, but some were older, very few were older. One of them was Mrs. Bahmut. She was an Indian, very wealthy. They had their own private car, which was very unusual. And so what Mrs. Bahmut do, by the way, she was tiny, she was very elegant, she had high heels. And in the back of her car, she would bring illegal arms that we needed to bring to our, what is called slick, to our place to mend them, which for which you would get 10 years of prison. But in order to make it absolutely right, she would always pick up a British soldier or a British policeman and put it, and she spoke very good English. And they had always a very good conversation. And that's how, to me, she was really a hero.
Now, she was an Indian Jew, or she wasn't
Indian
Jewish?
Jew, and the husband knew what she was doing. Swallowed hard, I'm sure. Never said no. I think.
Was this in the mid 40s or late 40s?
It was before that. It was
In the 30s?
in the 30s when the British were there.
Well,
Yes.
they were there until 1948.
48, no, it was early 40s,
And
late 30s.
some of it was for also defense against Arab attacks, or what?
Against Arab attacks,
Yeah.
but also for bringing in to Palestine of the time illegal immigrants, all
Yeah.
with the numbers on their hand. And it was dreadful to see these people come in, but you were willing to do anything to bring them in and to shelter them. May I stop about that for just a moment?
Please.
I remember one person holding the plate like this while he was eating, you know, and I couldn't help it. I turned to this man and I said, you don't have to do that. Nobody is going to take away your food. And he looked up and he said, I know, but it is more comfortable for me to do it. And I must admit, I don't usually want to kind of choke someone, but I did want to choke whoever caused this man to feel comfortable with that. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, that was a big task, helping helping people get into Israel.
Escape
in
from
spite
the
of-
Nazis, basically.
in spite of British restrictions.
That's right. We brought them at night. We brought them on our backs. I have an uncle in Kfar who was responsible for bringing people from there. We brought a lot of illegal immigrants who had nowhere else to go.
Now,
And
when
my father-in-law, shared Sidon in the 30s. I know he swam out, and
That's right.
because the ships would park outside,
Outside.
and he was one of the people that swam out and brought somebody in on his back into what
now
was then Palestine.
this was during the war or before the war? So were they
during the
escaping
30s.
from the Nazis? Or was it after the war?
It was after the war,
After the war.
but before State of Israel was recognized as a state, and
Right.
the British were waved goodbye.
Right. So the British were restricting Jewish immigration.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. These were not, you had to have a certificate. Yes.
Right. And these were concentration camp survivors.
They were, at least by the numbers. You suddenly saw so many people with those numbers. And in Israel, it's hot. You couldn't cover it. And so, I remember we met with Abba Kovner. He was in Ghetto Warsaw. And we asked him, how did the Jews agree to go to the concentration camp? He said to us something which I'll never forget. He said it didn't start there. It started by, you can't have a telephone. Okay, we can live with that. And then you have to walk only on, not on the, on where the cars go. Okay, we can work. Then you have to wear a yellow pad.
Start.
We can do that also, nothing wrong. Then walk into those trains. By that time, yes, they walked into the train. And so we learned from it one thing: we don't give an inch of our freedom and rights. There's no such thing as we will live with it. And quite frankly, to this very day, that's what I learned, and kept it.
Well, that stood you in good stead when you were the only woman joining the faculty, the law faculty at BU. But before that, you spent some time on Kibbutz Kfar Giladi, right?
That's correct. Well, it wasn't spending so much time as going there every summer, because I lived with my parents, but Kfar Giladi was established by Nahum Horowitz, who was a cousin of my mother. You know, the whole place was full of cousins and so on. And usually during the summer, I would go there, I would work there. And because I played the piano well, I usually also entertained piano and learned a lot about that. But Nahum Horowitz was really running it. So
I didn't realize that you were a pianist as well. Do you still play piano?
I do now, but not as much. But I started again. I started at 3. And this brings a lot of discipline. You can't
Oh,
say, I
yes.
don't feel like it today. You have to practice. And so at that time, I practiced quite a bit. And at 12, I wanted to be a concert pianist. But then I had the growth on my hand here, and they had to take it out. And that was the end of that hope. I could play, but I could not be a professional.
Oh,
And
wow.
I took it. So that's the
Well,
story.
now, what was your relationship to the Arabs at this time?
Okay. First of all, there was a man called Subhi Ayubi. He was a lawyer. He admired my father very much and was a good friend. And he saved my father when the Jewish lawyers were attacked in Jaffa. He took him to his home and then brought him home. When my father died, he came to me, swallowed hard, asked how his mother doing. And I began to help him. He wanted to sell his land to the government. At that time, it was the Israeli government. And I did help him to do that. He left for Libya and became a judge there. And then, to my surprise, I began to get notices from the British embassy for people who wanted my service. He was the one who sent me the clients. And in one particular case, I went even to London. I got, because the government was willing to accept my verification of the signature. And so the man, it was interesting. It was an Arab who was so scared of his own people because he wanted to sell the land to the government of Israel. And so I went to London, and there he signed, looked around very quickly, and out he went. And I came and verified the signature. That's how it was. But to go to Subhi Ayubi, we were friends until I didn't hear from him anymore. And I think that is when he died.
But he lived
When
out the rest of
you
his
went
life.
to law school, just where did you go to law school?
Okay. My first law school was the Jerusalem Law Classes. It was a law school established by the British in English. The teachers were usually judges who, how should I say, were giving a lecture. You stayed put for quite a while, for 2 years, wrote down whatever they said. And after 2 years, you got examinations, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. And that went on for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Obviously, if you did not pass one, you had to take the 2 years again. And there were some people, one of them I'll never forget, who said to me, I know all the questions and I know all the answers, but I don't know which answer to pick for each question. And that was he was a government official, and he was there forever. I was not there forever.
So, but just one moment. So your native language was Hebrew,
Oh yes,
and
My
then
na-
you learned English.
I studied English very early on, and I had to, because in order to go to, I was 17 when I went to the law school, but before that, I had to pass examinations in proficiency in English. And so I had to I had to know it before I went.
Now,
And-
what we haven't said is that your father was the head of the Bar Association, right? Or the lawyer.
Well, and that is a story. When my father came to Israel, he believed that Jews should work with their hands like everybody else. And then my mother told me that he went to work, but as they say, he had two left hands. Everything fell off. He was not used to work with their hands. Finally, the manager called him and said, Dr. Hoffman, go and practice law. And he came home like that, opened a little office, ended up being the first president of the Israeli bar. And as a result of it, I was involved. I met a lot of judges and lawyers, and played with as a child, I played with his children and so on. So I remember years later when I was at the Supreme Court, and one of the judges, Mora, called me through somebody to come in and asked me, how is mother doing? How this is doing? Because we knew each other from I was very young. That was the
Now, where did your father immigrate from?
Oh, he was in the Czechoslovakia on the German group, and he studied, I think, in another German law.
His native language was German then.
I'm
His
sorry?
language, his
Language,
native language was German.
it was German, but he was one of those who said "Ach verak Ivrit," which means only Hebrew. Don't speak any other language. Yes, and he knew Hebrew. He would translate for me some stories from German to Hebrew. So that was the principle. We don't speak any other language.
All right, now we're coming to the United States. When and why did you come to the United States?
Okay. When the state of Israel was already established, I was practicing law. My father died. I continued this office, but the contact was there. I don't know if I told you, I worked for the Israeli government in law for Chaim Cohen, who was the general counsel, immediately after the state was established. All the people in that group did not speak Hebrew as their language. They knew translations. And I was at the Air Force, but I walked and met somebody, said, hi, how are you? And could you come and join this group, yes, in the government? And I remember, and this is typical, I knocked on the door of my commander of the Israeli Air Force, Aaron Remez, and I said, they need somebody who speaks Hebrew from childhood. Can I go? And he said, well, I understand you can go, but find somebody to take your place. And so that's what I did. I called a few people, I knew quite a few, and finally Aaron Morial, to this very day I remember his name, was in the British Army, was a good lawyer, and he wanted the job. So he closed his office, went, and I could go then to the government and work there. So it was that kind of a thing. Did I answer your question?
No, and then-
No,
and
no,
then-
now, so why did you
so
come
how
to the
did you
United
move to the
States?
US?
Why did I?
Come
Oh.
to the US.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. The Israeli government had a very large international congress, if you will, meeting. And among those was a professor of Harvard Law School, Louis Loss. And at that time, Harvard was looking for foreign visitors. I happened to kind of bump, I was involved in that because they needed some people, and I was one of them, to show people around, to talk, to find where they wanted, and so. And so I met him and we talked. And then all of a sudden, about 6 months or almost a year later, I got an invitation to come as a visiting scholar to Harvard Law School. And at that time, it fit my life. And I wanted very much to study, very, very much. And so that's how I came. And I was awarded $60 a month. And so I couldn't take money out of Israel, but it was enough for me. And I must admit that that period, I was like a drunk. It was a whole new world of law that was open. And I walked a lot by myself and reminded and so on. Louis Loss was also the one who gave me an opportunity to publish. One more thing. At that time, I had a master, but I did not have an SJD, a doctorate. And he suggested that I write about variable annuities, which is insurance on the one hand and securities on the other put together. And nobody knew what it was. Even the insurance people didn't know what it was exactly. And so I wrote that and got the SJD. But I must admit, I enjoyed it so much. And then
But how did you have the sort of economics, finance knowledge?
$60 a month was not
No,
enough.
No. I mean to write about the variable annuities. Where did you get
had
your
a master.
economic?
No. I went as a visiting scholar, and I got a master.
Did you study at the business school at
No,
Harvard as well? Just the law
I
school?
studied at the law school. I studied law. Louis Loss brought me to the law school. And
But what I'm asking is, you were writing about variable annuities, and that has a lot of economics and finance related to it. So
Well-
how did you get the training to study that?
Well, what I studied or what I wrote about was the law. It was the legal, it was two legal system, but you had to know what it was.
Right.
As a matter of fact, what I did was I read libraries were very good, yes, and I read about the history where banks invested for clients. It was something similar. It wasn't exactly the same. But of course, I took securities regulation, I took corporate law, and all these other subjects. And then I wrote these. I did one more thing, and that was again Louis Loss. He introduced me to I forgot now the name, an insurance company here in Boston. And the general counsel there was willing to talk to me. That was number one. But he afterwards allowed me to look at some of the documents that so I learned the reality of it as well. It was just the beginning. And the people who didn't know about it was the regulators themselves. There was either insurance or there was securities. And this was combined. And so that was my study in addition to the theories, but only for law,
Yeah,
only
right.
at EU
So
law.
you became eventually the number one authority on fiduciary law.
How did I become?
Yeah, how did that happen?
How did that happen? First of all, it wasn't in one day. I don't believe that anything is becoming, can come in one day. But it was again, I think it was Lou who suggested that, but I was interested because I was interested in trust and in trusting and in entrusting, in giving somebody money and know that that money will be managed for me and not for anything else. And that is, it took me until 1948, which was quite a few years, to write about it. But even before that, I dealt with it quite a bit on this assumption, on this, how should I say, subject matter of trusting. It isn't the trust as an institution. That was true, but it was trusting relationships. And they were very important to me. And that's why I, in 48, I wrote that article.
68.
So you now are known around the world as the authority on fiduciary law.
You know, when there is a need, and then people take. It's true. Quite a few years ago, yes, I taught in, I don't remember exactly, but there was one Japanese student there. And that Japanese student then went back to Japan and studied law. And he then talked to what were trust banks. Japan during the Second World War had banks that were not only banking, but also like mutual funds. They managed people's money as well. And so each year, they used to send people to kind of, quote, study. And that student said, you'd better go to her to study. And I began to get every year for about 4 or 5 days, and before that, a list of questions about that fiduciary law. And it came together with not merely theoretically, I got it because it was the reality of these people. And then there were some others who came. And finally, and I will then, Mitsubishi Bank was one of the largest in the world. And they have established a trust museum. And can you imagine my surprise when the chairman of Mitsubishi Bank asked whether he could come and visit our home. And I graciously said yes. And then he came with a lot of, with entourage, with people who took pictures and did all sorts of things. And when Mitsubishi Bank established the Trust Museum, they asked me and my husband to come to Japan. And I gave with the chairman the opening of that.
And I have a book that they published of there's a book that they put out
correct.
it's dedicated to you.
That I didn't know.
Yeah,
maybe.
it is. It is. I have a copy.
Oh, then it must have been.
So you went from doing some articles to then joining the BU Law School? How
Oh,
did that-
yes. Tell us about that.
Well, I wrote articles. I finished and got one degree, the master degree, started working on the other one. As a matter of fact, I even taught one, I think one class, I don't remember whether 2 semesters or one, at the Harvard Business School. But I wanted to go to law school. And at that time, BU was looking for people. There was an issue of a woman.
Yes, they were all men.
They were all men, but they overcame that difficulty and decided to offer me a job. And that is how I joined, being the first. But also, there were some people who thought about Jews in a not exactly loving way. And I remember once standing in the corridor, it was a group, and one of them said, "You Jews, you always want the best, you demand everything," and so on. And I couldn't help myself and brought up my Israeli part. And I said, of course, we are hardworking, we are smarter than you, we do everything, and therefore, that's where we demand it. And he was so flabbergasted. They thought I would break into tears. I don't know why. But the end result was that we were very good friends because I played good music, and he loved the classical music. So you can overcome. I didn't hate him. He was born up that way. I was born up differently. And so you can bridge if you have a common denominator. So that's my story about him.
That's great. Now, let's talk a little bit about successful aging. You're an expert in that too. You're working on at least one book that I know about right now at age almost 97. What you said to me once that successful aging starts when you're very young. What did you mean?
Well, there are two things. There are some positions in which you cannot qualify unless you are of a certain age. At 3, you have to go to the kindergarten. At least that was how I was born. At 9 or at 6, you have to go to the school, and then so on. A lot of you can't be a doctor unless you can't marry unless you have a certain date, and so on. So there are a lot of functions and a lot of positions that require a certain age. I didn't call that aging, but it is, because before that, you are not of the age. As far as retirement is concerned, it's not age, it is from a position. When aging gives you a position, retirement takes you or closes the door from a certain position. And the difference is that when you age, you say, I'm still young, but in 3 years, I can go to the school, I can go to this, I can go to this. When you retire from to ? And then it's very important to have a society that gives the retired people some area of function, not for them, but in order to draw all their history, all their knowledge, all their mistakes, a lot of experience, good, bad, indifferent. It doesn't really matter. That you can judge afterwards. But the experience is important for those who didn't have it and may not want to have it.
Yeah.
And that they can take from those who aged.
To transmit the, not only the formal knowledge, but the implicit knowledge that you
Correct.
gain as you age and learn. Ideally, we keep learning. I know I'm trying to. And it's really quite an inspiration if you can stay healthy and stay functional.
And active. In fact, why don't you tell us about the latest book that you're writing?
Wait a minute, which one?
Right, exactly.
Well, give me the subject.
Well, the subject is, I guess you could call it how to get along with people of different, right?
Okay, I'll take one. One is really people, how to interact with people of different cultures.
Yes.
But it started with an article, by the way, a man whom I've never met, but he's a German scholar, and we both wrote about law and culture. These are two separate, but the same kind of thing. They are systems of behavior which have some background or rather some enforcement mechanism. It's not merely because I don't like chocolate. It's because you have to behave in a certain way if you want to be a member of that community. So you have these two systems, and that's what we have written now, an article which is published at BU Law. But what we are talking about, could you tell me again? I'm sorry, I moved.
What your latest book is about?
Oh, now, okay.
Yes.
It's a number of things, but I'm trying to kind of generalize, but it won't work.
Well, we have time. We can hear a few things.
Sure.
All right. Number one, I do, just a moment, let me look. I'm sorry, I kind of didn't prepare for what is unprepared.
You were going to consolidate compliance. Take your compliance book and make it.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'll do that. I wrote a teaching book, compliance book, about 500 pages. It has how enforcement of the law is done by an organization, not necessarily a corporate organization, any organization. As a matter of fact, could apply also to marriage. And so it had also questions, which I thought about as food for thought, yes, but questions to discuss. And now what I'm doing is taking that book and making a far shorter book and eliminating the teaching aspect of it, but rather put it in a position of a corporation or any other organization. How do you make people comply with what they don't necessarily like? So, for example, one of the enforcement mechanism is not to have a police come and bring,
Charges.
that's right, but rather have the middle management be the enforcer. They know everything that goes on, or they wouldn't be there. Yes, they have to, because they manage it. And at the same time, they can be rewarded, not by purity, there is no such thing, but by coming and saying, we goofed, we made a mistake, we want to correct it. And we told you now, not later when it became a disaster. That person gets a reward, both in money, but also perhaps in being invited to the chairman for dinner.
Recognition.
That's right. The recognition and the money. And the enforcers are not the top and not necessarily anybody, but those with whom they work, but the managers, but low level. Now, did I get that idea? No. There was an enforcement person who was a student of mine, an Israeli, who became an enforcement person of an insurance company. And she was the one who showed me this design. And then I asked her if I can do that, when I can describe it. And she said, of course. I forgot her name now, but it is in the book.
Now,
Thank you.
what about your?
Zvi, I just wanted to call our attention to some of our listeners about our interview with David Shipler, who was a New York Times journalist. And he had been an ROTC officer for the Navy in college. And he was on a ship. And we asked him, how did what he learned by being in the military help him later in his journalistic career? And what he said was that I learned that a lot of times people lie at the lower levels, and then it's transmitted up and up and up, and people at the top don't know what the truth really was, because it happens in the middle levels or the upper middle levels. And he said that helped him out to understand the Soviet Union, because people who were managing a plant or something, they would lie about what quota they met, and subsequently all that information went to the top, and people thought, well, our 5-year plan is going great, but it wasn't.
That's exactly correct. I believe in that too.
Well,
And
the book that my favorite book of yours is your book about Ponzi schemes.
Yes, it's interesting because, by the way, we had the disaster here of a Ponzi scheme. A man who is in hospital, now he's dead. But
Mr. Madoff.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Madoff?
Yes, Madoff. But when I wrote it, he was alive.
He was still alive, yeah.
Yeah, he was alive. And it's interesting that this book, by the way, or this subject, I've been asked to give a lecture to a class again in Europe, because, and there are some others now in Japan again, and in Singapore. Somebody wrote about.
So are you going to go to all these places?
No. They take the book. They ask me sometimes questions, and they teach it there, or they translate. And I just, if Oxford University agrees, then I agree too. Then they know what they want.
Yeah, well, you can do it now on Zoom, just the way we did.
I did a Zoom in Europe. That I did, and it was quite interesting. As a matter of fact, there is, and that is very different, but there is a I don't know what to call it, sages, they say.
Volunteer.
What?
It's a volunteer organization.
It's a volunteer organization, and we meet with the students who are fairly young, yes, 15 to 20, and do by Zoom discussions. And that is interesting, not only to them, but to me too, the questions and what bothers them today. I know
By the
what bothered
way,
me 30 years ago.
I know from talking with your husband, Ray Atkins,
Yes,
that he too is involved in a
correct.
volunteer
He is
organization.
involved in the stages. He, as a matter of fact, brought me in.
Right.
So let's close with how you see the state of fiduciary law today and the role of fiduciaries. How do you think it's evolved? Where are we now? And what should we be doing going forward?
There was a time when I started, and the first time when I published this article, that law and economics was very much the ruling type of thinking. And competition was the real key to success by everybody. I did not believe that, even for those who succeeded, let alone for the society and so on. So I think that, and by the way, there was one meeting where I wasn't hit, but it was close. The people were tremendously angry at the idea of fiduciary law and not law and economics, and banging each other and being the successful one. So this has gone far when people begin to understand that cooperation can be enriching to everyone, provided they are fair. If a doctor, here, there was a case of a doctor who left the operation table because he was called by his broker. And he had to go and sell some of the securities. Now, the patient didn't die. The patient was taken care of, but he lost his license for life. There are some examples of this sort where it's not merely that you have to be trusted, but your type of activity has to be trusted. And why? Because your activity cannot be successful, cannot be productive without given the power. And it is always with a situation in which the one who depends upon you has no idea what you do, how you do, when you do.
Right.
So this is what fiduciary is. I wrote a little article, and that is what I will mention here, that when you look at animals, they are fiduciaries, but it is in their genes. So the female lion is the one who brings the food because she's built that way. The female bee is also the mother, yes, and so on. But they can't change it. When it comes to monkeys, there's a book that shows that they can change, they can lie, and they can try and get more than what they give. And I think we have inherited, unfortunately, not the lion's genes, but the
Monkeys.
of the
Monkey
monkeys. And that's why we need fiduciary law. It is very similar to that. Now, I talked a lot and I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yes,
Well-
you did. Yes, you did. And I have to say, I think everybody now will understand why I say you're my role model.
Absolutely, and you become mine as well. So
You.
we wish you the best. If there's one thing that you think our listeners should read about fiduciaries and fiduciary law, what is there some reference that you might suggest?
What kind of
She has a book, The Bible of Fiduciary Law.
Your own book, what people should read.
That's the reference.
it is unfortunately, when I look at America's political, even use of words, yes, I see the economics model and not where is our common ground and where can we then find a balance about what we disagree in order to come and enrich everybody. I don't want to enrich you. I want to bury you. Well, the trouble with that is that all America, then you yourself get buried also. I'm sorry, I'm raising my voice. I really care about that.
Okay, well, I hope I don't get buried, but let's say that we really appreciate your
you.
stories,
Thank
your
you.
wisdom, your way of thinking. I personally have not really thought much about fiduciary law, but I certainly am now tempted to read more and learn more. And maybe I'll ask you a question
Well,
after.
you took the
something-
words out of my mouth. Please, please do.
Okay.
Please do. Thank you.
So, Zvi, unless you have anything, we'll
It's time to
Well,
say sei gesund.
sei gesund and
Thank you. And
keep up the great work.
same to you all.